Okay. Great. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us. We have with us Chuck Conroy, who is with the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, and we were speaking before about the number of pedestrian accidents we've had. We've had about 8 in recent months, and we just want to really hear from you how the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, could help us, going forward. And we really want to work, real hard, trying to make our community safer.
Sure. So thank you very much to everyone. As Supervisor Feiner mentioned, my name is Chuck Conroy. I'm with the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. And I very much appreciate this invite. This invite is a result of a conversation that Supervisor Feiner and I had a couple of weeks ago, where he asked about what are some of the opportunities at the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. And what I'm here to really talk about today is our agency, a brief, not a lot of people probably know who we are, and what are some of the grant opportunities that are available, and I'll round it out at the end with just a few of the different things that are happening at the state level that might be of interest or of use to you. So with that, I'll get right into it. I do have the PowerPoint of the screens up there, pretty much just to help follow along, but we'll keep going. The Governor's Traffic Safety Committee is a state highway safety office. Now, we receive our authorization and our funds from the federal government, and every state in the country has a state highway safety office. Our mission is to reduce personal injury and fatal crashes, and through public awareness, outreach, et cetera. And one of our largest program is our grant funding program. Our grant funds are primarily for education and enforcement. I know, and I've seen on your agenda, you have a number of different engineering countermeasures, and I spoke previously with some town staff that you have a lot of engineering countermeasures that you're employing. We don't do a lot with the engineering. We primarily focus on these education and enforcement opportunities. I'll talk a little bit more about what specifics those are. What does make up the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee? It is a partner, or it is a committee. It's an actual committee of the heads of state agencies who have a vested or stakeholder role in traffic safety. This consists of, for example, the Department of Motor Vehicles, which is the chair of the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. We have governor in our name, but we're actually housed within the Department of Motor Vehicles. We're not in the executive chamber or anything like that. Some other, Division of State Police, obviously, Department of State, Department of Transportation, State Education Department. All of these agencies are members of the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. And our outreach and engagement is supposed to be and is a conglomeration of all those agencies working towards a reduction in motor vehicle crashes. The last two agencies, Office of Parks and State Office for the Aging, are not legislatively part of our organization, but they do participate and they are members. To be able to apply for a Governor's Traffic Safety Committee grant, you must be a government agency or a not-for-profit that's registered with the Attorney General's Charities Bureau. Obviously, Town of Greenburgh would be eligible for a grant application as a municipality. I would assume that your fiscal agents and your fiscal people are pre-qualified and active in Grants Gateway. This is an important thing for you for any action going forward. Our deadline is May 1st. To apply for a grant is May 1st. Our call letter will probably be issued towards the beginning of March. This upcoming grant session is not active yet, but it will be active probably right around the beginning of March. So you'll have basically March and April if you wanted to submit an application, to do so. Our web address, that is actually, please don't write that down, I need to make a correction to that. Our web address just changed. It is now trafficsafety.ny.gov. That website is where we house all of our information. Anything that I mentioned today can be found there and in much greater detail. For the sake of brevity, and I know you have a long agenda, I wanted to try and get through as much of this as I can. So we have 3 distinct types of grants. The first I mentioned is our Police Traffic Services Grant. This is for typically overtime enforcement for officers to go out and do enforcement of traffic safety issues. These grants focus on behavioral issues, whether it be distracted driving, speed, seatbelt use, et cetera. And that is the primary and only output of those police traffic services, is that overtime enforcement. Now, we in New York are very fortunate to have the organization of Stop DWI. So our police traffic services grants typically do not fund overtime impaired driving enforcement. That is done through your county Stop DWI. So we focus on those other behavioral elements like distracted driving, speed, et cetera. The second grant is a child passenger safety seat grant. This program is designed to make sure that no children are riding in a car with a seatbelt that is installed improperly, and that those who are of need have access to a child passenger safety seat. We have a number of child passenger safety seat grants around the state. You do have one here in Greenburgh. The final.
Are we getting funding from you for that?
Yes, I'll go into your grants in a moment. The third grant, and the grant that I think would be the most relevant to the situation in this discussion, would be a highway safety grant. A highway safety grant tends to be our more catch-all and really tends to focus primarily on education, of making sure that motorists are aware of the different rules and regulations when it comes to driving, public social norming messages, which we'll show you one of at the end of this presentation, outreach and education, whether it be in high school based, whether it be senior center based, or whether it be anything. It really is a catch-all, and it depends a lot on the style of intervention that the applicant is looking to do. So these are our three primary grant programs. The town of Greenburgh does have two grants with us presently. The first is a PTS grant. You're funded $16,500. That budget is broken out. We do require, as part of each one of our police traffic services grant, that every agency participates in a click it or ticket seatbelt mobilization. This is a high visibility enforcement engagement. High visibility enforcement is one of the most successful countermeasures for motor vehicle crashes. So we mandate that every police traffic services grant does a portion of their budget on this click it or ticket May mobilization. It's typically the last week or two in May and goes into June. The $12,500, which is in your regular PTS, we rely on any applicant to provide for us the justification and the problem identification for where their traffic safety problem is in your community. I highlighted the three different locations, which I think are mentioned in some of the documents, then some of the things that Supervisor Feiner sent to me: Central Park Ave, Route 100, Ardsley Road from the village of Ardsley to the village of Scarsdale, and Terrytown Road from the city of White Plains to the village of Terrytown. I personally, I forgot to introduce my coworker here, Jim Knapp. He does a lot with pedestrian safety, so I brought him along as well. We were on Terrytown Road, and we saw a pedestrian cross against the signal twice. So, you know, there are obviously opportunities here. You do have a child passenger safety seat grant. It's about $1,000. Those grants do typically tend to be smaller. A portion of that is for recertification of a technician, et cetera, and a small amount for car seats. So those are your two. Any questions on your specific grant?
The 12.5 is what again? I'm sorry.
So that's your regular police traffic services. That is whatever your problem that you've stated to the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. It is developed through crash data and analysis. So every police agency is supposed to tell us where their traffic safety problem is, and then we provide some resources for them to do high visibility enforcement in those areas.
Would the grants cover if we wanted to buy, say, digital speed boards that say how fast you're going? That's sort of like education, but it's also a deterrent.
Typically, no. And I'll get into. I can kind of get into that. They tend to be a bit more of a passive enforcement. And they're very, you know, there's a significant dollar amount that's with those. So we typically do not fund reactive speed signs.
What about, you know, I was thinking, let's say on East Hartsdale Avenue, these are off the top of my head. The idea is, let's say we put banners saying, don't cross, only use the crosswalks. Would it like a banner? Signage. Banner, signage, you know, that would be, and I was even thinking of even another idea was, let's say we go to the schools and we have the kids design a banner or a poster telling, encouraging people to cross safely, to wear reflectors. Is that something that would be eligible?
I think all those are things that can be put in an application and would do well in the review process. I mean, what is fundable, ultimately, we do have some criteria, which I'll get into in a minute, but then it happens through the review process where we might find out what specifically your plan is. So I'll get into, because earlier we had this conversation, and this is inevitable in grant funding, is how much can I get? So the highway safety grant starts with your problem identification. So it's identifying now this data set that you've mentioned where you've had 8 significant pedestrian crashes in a recent period of time. I'm unfamiliar with your specific data elements, so I'm not sure. But that is an example of a significant increase in pedestrian crashes. That is sufficient. That would be using data to establish your problem identification. Specific times and locations, it's happening here and it's happening then. That would help and assist us in building the entire problem identification. And then finally, your mitigation strategy. This is your outreach, whatever it may be. If it's you need poster board to be able to create the posters that those students are going to be creating. You say you need 300 poster boards and they're $1.25 a piece, and you need funding for that. Those 3 elements together are what set your budget. So the reason this slide is so important, for me, is because some people sometimes ask in grant funding, well, how much can I get? It's not really about how much you can get. It's about what your problem is and what you're going to do about it. So I just wanted to stress that briefly. And some elements of a complete problem identification.
Would that also include, say, personnel? Let's say the police department has a youth officer and they go into the schools. Would they be able to, and we're going to be spending, we need additional personnel, or we need, more overtime, to cover that?
Sure.
Would that be something?
Personal services is an allowable expense. I'll get into some of the other allowable expenses as well.
That seems to be what you're really looking for, is so that there's an actual interaction with
Yes.
the person, as opposed to having a board that has a display sign on it.
Yes, there are a number of different ways that the public can be engaged, and all of them are viable to a certain extent. There is a hierarchy, and there are some things that are a little bit better, but I don't want to dissuade any ideas. The next is it has to be local, stressing that if you're providing data, you're not giving countywide data or something along those lines. You're actually providing data for your jurisdiction. It has to be specific. It can't be general. We're having a lot of speeders on this road. There has to be data to back it up. When, that's another important thing that we like to talk about. When are these crashes happening? And finally, the location. We emphasize, particularly enforcement, that it's important to go where the crashes are happening. So being able to identify that location, as you have in Greenburgh, your grant staff that we work with, and I was telling the chief a moment ago, has done a good job in establishing where their crashes are happening on those 3 locations. So those are some of the elements of a complete. Just some real quick, some sample data sources if you ever need them. The SUNY Institute for Traffic Safety and Management Research, which is a partner and part of the SUNY system. They produce a traffic safety statistical repository that's available at that website that's there, itsmr.org/TSSR. That website provides state crash and ticket data, and you do have the ability to break down to the municipality. So you can get pedestrian crash data, you can get impaired driving crash data, you can get a number of different data sets. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
How current is the data?
It is up to date within 3 months.
Okay.
Now, crash data is typically delayed. So that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that, because there is a process, when the crash occurs, that fatality may not be a fatality for 2-3 months if the person, doesn't pass away for a while. So there needs to be a period of time built in to allow for the data set to become complete. It's usually about 1.5 years. Data for a year will typically be published the next October. So we just finalized 2019's numbers are our finalized 2018, or excuse me, 2019's numbers are preliminary. We just finalized 2018 numbers in October of last year. So, but the Traffic Safety Statistical Repository does provide preliminary numbers for 2019 up to 3 months prior to its effective date. So I think right now it's got data from September in it. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think it's typically 3 months.
And it'll be published in October.
The complete data set, it will become, it's never a hard date,
Okay.
but typically it's around October. So you'll see finalized 2019 numbers roughly around October of 2020.
Let's say the police right now, they do enforce the no texting, and let's say they have a detail that's out there, but they want to increase the amount of enforcement. Could we get grants for if we want to have, a lot of extra enforcement in terms of distracted, driving?
It's all about that problem identification, and it's all
We
about
could get
that data
funding for
set.
things that we're doing, but we're increasing.
Funding is dependent upon that problem identification and the enforcement strategy that you detail in your grant application. The short answer is yes, there would be an opportunity, but I never guarantee.
We're in the process of doing that now,
Yep.
the enforcement and education
Exactly.
approach to this,
Yep.
to this problem. So as we speak, officers have been out there for a number of months, actually,
Yep.
but now even more. So identifying the hot spots, and it's a multi-pronged approach between pedestrian behavior, obviously, and driver behavior.
Exactly.
And as well as physical environment. There's several factors involved, so we're trying to approach it from an educational standpoint and an enforcement, right down to police-to-citizen interaction on a vehicle stop, or a pedestrian maybe jaywalking. We'll inform them that they're jaywalking. We'll issue them not a summons, but sort of like a warning, an informational
Right.
warning that you could be injured doing this, and just to watch out and to stress to them that drivers may not see them. And then for drivers as well who are violating different V&T rules, we're going to enforce those rules. So it's already, the data as we speak is being gathered to put forth.
Do you have, since your committee has existed, are there any models that, we could review what other communities have done around the state that have been, or around the country that have been successful, that we could basically also implement?
I believe so. I can't think of any off the top of my head. There aren't a lot of municipalities like you who are taking this step. It's mostly, we have a lot of nonprofits. Most municipalities tend to do the police traffic services or something along those lines. But, yes, absolutely, we can provide for you some examples of effective countermeasures on pedestrian enforcement or pedestrian education.
And just to also put this in the right frame of mind, before we, we had this meeting, we were talking about an hour ago, and you mentioned that although Greenburgh has had a rash of instances, people shouldn't think that we're like the worst, most unsafe community, in the state or even in the county. You feel that there's pedestrian accidents all over the place.
Well, and the next portion after this, I was going to go over some of, you asked me what some of the allowable expenses are. These are some of the allowable expenses. Real briefly, equipment has an asterisk next to it. It's not typically the passive radar, speed measurement devices or those types of things. It's typically a police agency has a speed problem and they buy a LiDAR or a speed measurement device for the vehicle. Those are typically our equipment purchases. You mentioned personal services. Personal services is one. Training, printing and reproduction, if you're printing informational brochures or something along those lines. These are some of our allowable expenses. Some of our unallowable expenses, we don't buy pens or pencils or any of those types of things, some of those giveaways. We don't do that. We don't do incentives or prizes of cash. This list stands for itself. It's available in the grant program. You can take a look at it and review it more. When and if you get to the point where you're looking to submit an application, just be aware of the allowable and unallowable costs.
That's great.
The final thing, and I'll try and wrap this up quickly, I just want to make sure you're aware of the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, which is a statewide partnership between the Departments of Health, Transportation, and Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. And it's a comprehensive five-year pedestrian safety plan that includes, now, I told you before, we primarily deal with education and enforcement. This actually does have some engineering countermeasures. It's primarily for outside of New York City, actually entirely outside of New York City. And their 2021 goals were to reduce pedestrian fatalities by 20% and reduce serious injuries to pedestrians by 10%. To your point, what you just said a moment ago, pedestrian crashes are a big problem throughout the state. Almost a third of our total fatalities in the state are pedestrian-related crashes. So we can see that over 300 pedestrians killed each year, 15,000 pedestrians injured, and over 25% of motor vehicle-related fatalities are pedestrians.
Do you have a sense whether they increase this time of year when the time falls back and the days are shorter?
Limited. I can provide some of that TSSR gives you the breakdown. I can't speak to your specific area, but the TSSR would provide you a month-by-month breakdown of the crashes in your community, and I believe it's by type. I think we can get pedestrian crashes specified through the TSSR for you.
But is it by time of day? Can we tell whether or not it's an evening crash?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I could bring it up in a few moments. Once you go on with your business, I can bring it up and we can look. And we can go right in and check. I don't believe it has time of day. I think it only has day of the week and month of the year.
So we won't know if it's shortly after dark?
I don't recall. We'll take a look.
Okay.
So the PSAP identified the top 20 high crash locations outside of New York City. As you can see, a significant number of them are down on Long Island. We have a lot of your major metropolitan centers. White Plains and New Rochelle and Yonkers are the three of the jurisdictions here in Westchester County. Poughkeepsie, Albany, all through up to kind of the thruway belt there. And these have been identified as the top 20 pedestrian crash locations.
Greenburgh has a White Plains post office address, some of it. So would we be considered White Plains in this list?
For the purposes of this, I do not believe you are. I think it's only wholly the city lines. Excellent question.
Can speed limits be lowered on state roads, such as Central Avenue and Hillside Avenue?
I think analysis of a speed is an important factor in the totality of your mitigation strategy, whatever it may be. Looking at the speed, making sure that the speed is accurate for the road. No singular solution is the catch-all. And it really does need to be these 3 E's that we mentioned that's up here right now: engineering, education, and enforcement. That it's a comprehensive approach which tends to be the most successful. Singular, any one of these by themselves typically does not have the same weight as they do together.
We have like schools, for example, the Bailey School.
Yeah.
There's not a really great crosswalk.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to enhance the crosswalk in front of that school, or I'm thinking not only, that Highview, we were at Highview last week, and I think there's no crosswalk. So if we wanted to improve the crosswalk, there, that's not...
That's not us. However, if you wanted to do education there because you identified it as a high crash location, and you wanted to do education about proper use of crosswalks, we would be able to support some programming there.
So we could basically work with the school staff and tell kids that this is how they could get to and from school safe.
Exactly, using the crosswalk. So that's how it would work with the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. So, these are the different partners. Department of Health does the education. Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, through our Police Traffic Services grant, primarily does the enforcement. And we also do enforcement trainings. So I know that some of your police officers have attended our pedestrian enforcement trainings recently over the last couple of years. We've had some, I think we've had 2 of them recently within the last several years in Westchester County.
Last week, Judith DeVille and I, we had a swearing-in ceremony at the Highview School, and we swore in about 100 third graders to be deputy supervisors for public safety. And and we basically had them. We asked them to raise their hand if their parents text while they're driving, and I think practically everybody's hand went up. And then we asked them to throw their parents in jail. No, we asked them to basically, part of their responsibility was to educate their parents.
Yeah.
So if we had basically, if we asked for a grant where we worked with the students and, you know, they basically helped us come up with an enforcement, you know, plan where they're motivating their parents, that could be something.
That,
As an
based on what you
educational-
just said, in a very cursory, that sounds like a fundable program, yes. Based on the problem identification, what you decide you ultimately want to do with it, and your measurable results. You know, and we can talk about that at other levels. The PSAP does have a website. It's ny.gov/pedsafety. Jim brought some of, and I know that you may have already seen these, the See and Be Seen tip cards and some of the materials that are available. I'll pass these around. You can request some of these materials from this website free of charge. They'll ship it out to you. So you can get some preliminary and some things right now. The one thing I forgot to mention about the grant program is that the deadline for application is May 1st, but the earliest that you'd be able to spend any money would be October 1st of 2020. Our grant award time is with the federal fiscal year, so it goes October 1st of any given year to the following September 30th. So that is the time frame that you would have to execute and use all the funds. So the earliest, if you were to apply for a grant this May 1st, that you could spend the funds would be, if approved, would be October 1st of 2020. And that's federal fiscal year 2021. The last thing I want to show you, hopefully, is something that you see on TV. This is the tip card I just passed around. This is a public service announcement. We do have public service announcements like this. There are a number of different pedestrian safety things. If you have internal or local closed circuit, we can provide some of these videos for you. That's all right. Go ahead, Jim.
How many people do you see? One, maybe two. Guess again. As a pedestrian, you see headlights, but that doesn't mean the driver sees you. When walking at dawn, dusk, or after dark, make sure to be seen by oncoming traffic. Walk facing traffic. Wear light-colored, light-reflective clothing. Carry a bright light so drivers can see you. Use crosswalks. See and be seen. Pedestrian safety. It's no accident.
So videos and materials like this, we do content that is directed both to the pedestrian and to the motorist, because as the slogan says, it's important to see as a driver, make sure that you're identifying pedestrians in the roadway, and be seen as a pedestrian to make sure that the driver is able to see you.
We could put that on public access. We should speak to George, and I think that's great.
Yeah, we
can
have a number
definitely
of
want
those different videos, and we can definitely provide that to you.
Definitely, we want that.
So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I would be happy to discuss any elements of the grant program or specifics, and I guess I'd turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I just want to also introduce you to Maya Barmasha. Maya, you want to stand up? She's actually a sixth grader, and she's leading the effort in Edgemont to get a sidewalk on Fort Hill, Road, and she's been all over, the median, working really hard. And, maybe one idea that you could do, since we're making progress on the sidewalk, is maybe you could help us come up with a plan for kids to be educated as to, ways to be safer. Is that something that would interest you? Great.
Great, excellent. Keep up the good work.
Great. Any other questions anybody has?
I think your presentation was very good and clear, and I particularly like this. Is this downloadable from the website?
There is a place that I can share. It's I don't think it's downloadable. It's a YouTube link. So it's visible, but it's difficult to download from YouTube. But we do have other places where you can download it from. I'll share that with you.
Very good.
There's a number of other resources on the website as well. When you go there, you'll see not only these tip cards, but also there's posters available. For the law enforcement, there's warning cards that you can send away for, we'll ship them free of charge. The PSAs, there's 4 other PSAs, in addition to the visibility PSA. The tip card itself is available in 15 different languages. All that's available free of charge, you just have to request it.
One of the issues that we've had is, we do deal with the state, and sometimes it's, more difficult than it's not simple getting all the traffic safety initiatives. Maybe, Francis, you could give us an update on the Sacred Heart effort so far, what's happening with that, and I'm wondering if the Governor's Committee could be sort of a partner if we're lobbying the state for either traffic lights or to approve it, where you could review it and then, help us lobby.
No.
From what I understand, we need bump outs, you don't handle bump outs.
Correct.
We need a traffic light, you don't handle traffic lights.
Correct.
But we need a tremendous education program on how to use a crosswalk for both the pedestrians and the drivers, and what to do for the drivers as they approach a crosswalk.
Yes.
Because it appears that they don't understand, the drivers, that as soon as a foot goes into that crosswalk, they're supposed to stop on both sides.
Exactly.
That's not happening. When we had DOT out by Lawton Avenue and Central Avenue about 3 weeks ago to initiate traffic counts, which were done, they were shocked that people were crossing at the crosswalk and cars were just going by. Similar to what happened the time when the child got hit and seriously injured in that crosswalk. We were wearing, 3 of us from the town, fully reflective vests. We had a police car at the curb. We had 2 other police cars across the street. We had DOT members with town staff across the street by the pet cemetery. Cars didn't stop.
Wow.
For one of them, it was a bad day because that patrol car that was by the curb didn't stay at the curb because one of the cars almost hit us. And we were being as careful as we possibly could. We made it halfway across, not quite, but it's scary. And people are taking their lives in their hands when they try to cross where it's supposed to be safe, and that's a crosswalk. The education component, and you say many municipalities don't do this. I don't know why not.
Yeah.
Because after you put in the hardware, after you put in the infrastructure, then we have to educate. It's going to take some time to get the hardware in, get the light in, and so in the meantime, we have to do a tremendous amount of education, even more so in how to deal with crosswalks, including to use them.
Yeah.
We've had situations where there was a crosswalk within 200 feet, and yet pedestrians cross mid-block. And it's a very dangerous situation. I know we have done it in the past. Traffic volumes are greater now. Visibility seems to be decreasing. It's somewhat unrealistic to expect somebody to wear a white coat in the winter time so they'll be seen, because it'll always be in the cleaners, I guess. Whatever the reason, it's really difficult, and right now it's very troubling to get message after message as there's been a pedestrian fatality. I really thank you for recognizing there is an education program and frankly grants for an education program, because that is extremely important, not just putting in the hardware and walking away. We can't do that.
Right.
And most of the accidents that we've had haven't been due to lack of sidewalks. It's been people crossing the street at the wrong places, not using crosswalks. Could be people wearing dark clothing. So the education, we've been focusing a lot on sidewalks, and we're going to continue to focus on sidewalks, but the education component has to be a real major aspect. So I think this is...
There's also people driving too fast.
Exactly.
And
People driving
right,
too
but I'm
fast.
saying, if we look at the texting, the distractions, and then the pedestrians being more careful, it's like a package of everything. I mean, the bad news is Garrett came up with a report about how much money we have to spend on sidewalks to make the town, safe, and you want to come up and because it was sort of interesting. It's a little discouraging because.
Do you have time to hear? Okay.
Because there's so many sidewalks it would be like $100 million, you know, to do everything. So do you want to give us your report?
Yeah, just an overview. We now have had the time to develop metrics based on the comprehensive plan to identify the most pertinent roads that would provide the best value for safety, generally the arteries and veins of the town, oftentimes state roads, but not exclusively. In fact, many local roads, a few county roads, and in many instances, we're realistic. While you would desire a sidewalk on both sides of the road, you know, we got to be realistic when you start talking about the numbers that we're about to talk about. So in many instances, you're looking at a sidewalk on one side of the road. Where there's footpaths, better than nothing. However, the intent is for those footpaths to be converted to, you know, full sidewalk, concrete sidewalk. And the numbers, yeah, they're staggering. So to be what I would consider, you know, it's tough, 18-square-mile town with varying topography.
Unincorporated area.
Unincorporated area, thank you. We've identified a total of 15.89 linear miles of state sidewalks that are needed, less than a mile of county sidewalks that are needed, and 29.5 linear miles of local Greenburgh sidewalks that are needed. We use a $400 per linear foot cost metric.
400,000.
I'm sorry?
400,000.
I'm sorry, $400 per linear foot
Oh,
metric.
okay.
As a multiplier, and when you take the linear feet of all that mileage, it actually projects out to $97 million, and that's 2020 value. I'm saying this, all those numbers I just put out don't take into consideration any sort of prioritization. So clearly, you know, when we're talking about, you know, 35 miles of sidewalk needs, definitely, you know, they're not all the same. There are certainly sidewalks that are, you know, more beneficial to get students to school, or more beneficial to, or more heavily trafficked, so we absolutely will prioritize them. But it just gives you a kind of a scale reference of the magnitude of, you know, what you would really want to do. And again, absolutely, sidewalks are not, you know, the answer. They're just one facet. But, you know, we were tasked with taking a close look at sidewalks, and these are some of the preliminary statistics that we've deduced.
Good. I wanted to also ask Victor, and we have Maya here also, if you could maybe give us a report on, and, you know, Garrett, on the RFP for the Fort Hill Road. You know, what's the next,
Yeah.
steps, you know, on that?
I'll just lead off, Victor, if you don't mind, just a few words. What I would say is, yes, we absolutely, yeah, wait till Victor gets settled here. Fort Hill Road is absolutely one of the roads that were just referenced in all the mileage of high-priority sidewalk needs in the town. And specifically, we're tasked with looking at the intersection of Fort Hill Road from Underhill to Longview Drive. And you know, what I'll say, I just want to lead off, unfortunately, it's not the road that lends itself to go straight to a topographic and boundary survey, hand that over to an engineer, design your sidewalk, and then go right to bid. You know, as we all know, Fort Hill Road is narrow. It has quite a bit of curves. And we have to really think closely about if you build that sidewalk, what other measures for from a traffic calming perspective need to also be implemented, because the last thing we want to do is build a sidewalk that actually could invite dangerous conditions. So in lieu of the fact that this is not that, you know, survey, design, build type setup, we've set an RFP that Victor authored that sort of takes a multi-phase approach and looks at construction feasibility, traffic calming measures, the potential even for a one-way if deemed absolutely necessary.
And just a brief follow-up on that, some of those constraints. What we're looking to do is actually take some broad ideas, as Garrett noted, and put it out to the consultant community and ask them for, you know, basically a request for proposals, which would offer what their professional abilities are as a firm, what some of their qualifications may be, And so in this case, we outline the problem, then we ask how they might, how they have solved similar problems in the past. And we're offering then the opportunity to review those proposals with a couple of more details that we've asked about the team that they might be putting together, to include things, additional data such as interaction with the police department, review of accident data. We're looking ultimately to have an overall analysis of the area. So, but the first proposal really will be to get from the consultant community what qualities and abilities they have, and we'll bring that to the town board and ultimately choose a consultant, and we'll probably have to then ask a secondary list of questions till we find and select a consultant who will help us through that process. And the goal ultimately is to find a safe and effective way for people to navigate through the Fort Hill Road corridor area. Well, we believe a sidewalk is definitely, an option. It's again, we've all walked the community. We understand the constraints that might be there, and we think this is a better way of getting a study and getting professional input and helping to identify some more points of issues along the way.
When do you think the RFP would go out if the board okays it?
Well, Garrett and I have a draft kind of hot off the press right now that we have for the town board. If you want to take some time today, tomorrow to take a look at it, the draft copy, we'll definitely move it on to the police to take a look at. But with the consensus of the town board, we would be ready to move this out and issue it in a formal process. But we wanted to have the discussion with the town board ahead of time. But we've got the basis of the draft available for the town board to take a look at. And then it would be to the town when you feel if we could just move forward and issue it on your own, or if you want to have a formal process.
Can I make a suggestion? Since this is so important and it's such a complicated, potential sidewalk, maybe we could post the draft on the town website, then invite people from the community to look at it and, possibly come up with possible improvements. And maybe the goal could be for the town board to then vote on it, say, to authorize it, say, February 12th?
Well, again, the action of the town board is at your choice. I think as this is in a draft document, I would ask the town if you're comfortable putting a draft document out to the public, as much as if you would probably want to get public input at a further process along when we have the consultant, we're beginning to formulate more of the design approach. But again, that would be something the town board might want to discuss.
I'm just sort of thinking that, one of the things that we're really trying to do is really educate the community and highlight the fact that, we all have to not only look at this sidewalk, but all the other sidewalks. So I sort of feel that if we invite the community, participation in terms of reviewing a draft, it does, more than one thing. It gets people thinking about safety and all the issues that we have to focus on. And maybe people will come up with good suggestions, and then we could, as a community, move forward. And we're also sending a message to the community. We did a walk. There were pedestrian accidents near that location, not at that location, but near it. And it sends a message that, we really are serious. I want people in the town and the state to realize that we're going to do everything possible and everything humanly possible to make the town safer for pedestrians and motorists. And, we're not going to, we're looking at every single thing, and we want the community involved in it.
On that note, just one suggestion, maybe there could be a targeted solicitation direct to the applicable civic association for this RFP, as opposed to blasting it out townwide and getting 67 comments that we have to synthesize. If you wanted to go the route of public solicitation, it's just one idea.
Why don't you let the board read it for a few days,
Yes.
so that we are putting out something that has the potential of passing, rather than putting it out and not know.
Okay,
And we have our questions, all our questions.
that's fine.
I think February 12th makes sense, and we can get it up sooner than later onto the website.
Okay, that would be great. So we'll get it to the civic people.
We'll circulate it internally to the board, and when
And
you
we'll follow what the town board's
whatever he wants
direction
to do.
following that.
That is great. So, I appreciate it. I'm glad that we're really moving forward on this. Also, you're going to be doing a prioritization of the sidewalks?
Well, the intent is to take this mapping and all these priorities and prioritize them to some degree, you know. At the end of the day, I don't think any one of us really can sit here and say, you know, there's, 200 sidewalk segments, here are those sidewalk segments in order. I think we'll sort of break down some initial prioritization, figure out what fiscally we could do in a 5-year period or a 3-year period. And I think once we know what, fiscal constraints we can get over, then we can, identify how best to prioritize. If all that could be spent is, $200,000 a year, then, it's going to be extremely difficult. The higher the number, the more segments we can do and kind of get those segments done in important areas. I think we really need to know fiscally what the outlook on, what we can do with capital funding to really help prioritize.
With an unlimited amount of money, they would all be done.
Right.
So to prioritize something that should be done is difficult. But we have to also, follow the data in that much of what we're experiencing has nothing to do with putting in sidewalks. And so we also have to make sure that we're taking care of infrastructure issues that may address the actual cause of some of these accidents. At the same time, we make some progress. But the public is never going to want us to spend the multiple millions of dollars that it would take to do all of these sidewalks at the same time. As much as we would like to, it's just not fiscally reasonable to do it.
No.
And so there's a balancing act. So all you have to do, and take the weekend to do it, is prioritize those so we hit the right ones.
Sounds good.
Okay, that's all you have to
Yeah,
do.
well, what we said, we were going to try having a 3-year plan, something like a 3-year plan, and we'll be able to say, this is what we're going to do in 2021, 22, and 23, and then after that, we'll move, we'll do it gradually, so.
And also, the boards have been very proactive in land use reviews, approving projects. Many segments have been done by virtue of the private sector in connection with approvals. The grants, there's been great support there from, all staff and the town board, so we're going to continue to be in the TAP grant cycle. So we're not just approaching it thinking, the capital is the only solution. We're pretty much whatever we can get our hands on.
Do you have any other suggestions for us?
Nothing specific. Engineering-wise, again, that's not really our element, but it sounds like some of the educational programs that you've bantered about would be interesting, and we can evaluate that further.
And if you think of other things other communities are doing that we haven't thought of, maybe you could let us know.
We do have some existing partners in the county who I can make sure you're aware of. I'll send you a list of grantees in the county who are doing pedestrian safety outreach, who maybe you could invite to do some of their outreach and education here in the town. I'll share that with you.
It's good to hear.
Yeah, I guess I was building on that, just curious if there's like a Vision Zero type initiative that's being done outside of New York City, a Vision Zero-like initiative.
For pedestrian safety, it's the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan that I mentioned. That's the
Town-
comprehensive
statewide,
plan,
right,
yeah. That to deal with this specific issue, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, again, thank you very much. And my role as the Highway Safety Program Rep for Westchester County is to be a conduit, so if anyone has any questions, I'll leave some of my business cards here. You can feel free to contact me.
Thank you.